A couple days ago, the Milwaukee Bucks swept the Miami Heat in the first round of the playoffs. This was a landslide of a series. The Bucks were the better team by far. They swept them 4-0. The first game was close. It went to overtime and Chris Middleton hit a game winner to win the game 109-107. But the Bucks proceeded to win game 2 by 34 points, game 3 by 29 points, and game 4 by 17 points. It was a complete manslaughter of a series, and the Bucks absolutely destroyed them. And if you guys watch my channel, you know I put out my playoff bracket about a week ago, and I had the hot take that the Miami Heat would make the finals again. So here I am now looking like a complete idiot, and as I mentioned in that video, brackets can go either way. In 2019, I predicted the champion correctly and ranked in the 80th percentile in the online bracket challenge. In 2020, I again predicted the champion correctly and ranked in the 90th percentile, and this year the team that I had making the finals out of the East gets swept and completely destroyed in the first round. So it can go either way, and this year it doesn't look like my bracket's going to be great unless the Lakers do end up winning the championship. But anyway, what I'm going to be doing in today's video is going through everything that went wrong for the Heat and everything that went right for the Bucks, and how they were way more prepared for this series than they were last year. And the Heat are a completely different team this year, and the Bucks had a very good plan going into this series. The Bucks executed and the Heat played absolutely horribly. Before we get started, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos, and also follow me on Instagram at danadulari.yt. I'm giving this shout out a lot these days because I'm posting tons of extra content about the playoffs in my story over there, so make sure you go follow me on Instagram as well. With that being said, let's get into it. In this video, I'm going to be discussing 5 things that went wrong for the Heat and right for the Bucks. Now, the first thing is a very simple one here. It's simply the play of Tyler Hero. Last year, we thought Tyler Hero was emerging as a star in the NBA. Tons of people around the NBA community were calling him a future all-star, and for good reason. He's a young player who had a very good overall game and was an amazing scorer, especially in the playoffs, an amazing volume scorer, and had an amazing impact on this Heat team, especially all the way leading up to the finals. But a lot of people saw him as overrated, and I saw this too. And I saw him overrated right when people started saying things like he might be a future MVP, and I just don't see how this was realistic. And I really think that Tyler Hero is one of those players that's inconsistent. I still think that he might have the potential to one day be an all-star, but he's one of those players that's just inconsistent, and unfortunately this year in this series, he played absolutely horribly. Now, last year in the series against the Bucks, he put up 13.6 rebounds and 4 assists in the series on 38% from the field, 42% from 3, which is pretty good, and 53% true shooting. So not overall great efficiency, but very good shooting, and he's a pretty good volume scorer. And this season in the series against the Heat, he puts up 9 points per game with 3 rebounds and 2 assists on only 31% from the field, which is absolutely atrocious, 31% from 3, and a horrendous 45% true shooting. Tyler Hero this year was simply not the same player, and again, I'm not saying he's a bust or anything, he's just one of those inconsistent players. And the Bucks also had a very good plan to guard him defensively. They had a lot of different guys guard him during the series, and Tyler Hero just never got going. And like I said, he's an inconsistent player that just had a really bad series this time, and it came at the worst possible time of the season. The next thing I'm going to be discussing is how Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo were absolutely exposed in this series. I have to give the Bucks credit here because they came in with a plan this season. Last year in the series against the Heat, they didn't come in with a plan, but this time they did, and when they were guarding Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, they know that they can't shoot, so they left them wide open. Let's start with Jimmy Butler. Last year, the Bucks kind of guarded Jimmy Butler like any other player, which you can't do since he's an all-star player, obviously, but he shoots horrendously from 3. And this season specifically, Jimmy Butler shot 25% from 3 throughout the entire season, with the league average being 36%, so obviously he's not a very good 3-point shooter and doesn't shoot a lot of 3s either, so there's really no point in defending him at the 3-point line. And the Bucks left him wide open in this series, and even though he was wide open, he took a little bit more 3s and only shot 27% from 3 in this series. And this allowed the Bucks to defend Jimmy a lot easier. They put Giannis on him a lot, and that helped a lot when he was trying to go and score in the mid-range and at the rim, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more in depth a little bit later on in the video. But their main plan against Jimmy was to leave him open from 3, and it worked very well. Same thing with Bam Adebayo. We know that he can't shoot 3s and doesn't shoot 3s, and he operates a lot in the mid-range, whether it's actually scoring or using his playmaking ability, standing at the elbows, the free throw line, screening, and doing all of that. But again, The Bucks left Bam wide open, and not just from 3 but also in the mid-range, and Bam's not even that bad of a mid-range shooter. This season he shot 45% from mid-range on 8 attempts per game, and in the playoffs he shot 46% from mid-range on 6 attempts per game. But overall, the mid-range shot is not a good effective shot to take, because first of all, it's only worth 2 points, and the percentages are just really low. It's just not a high percentage shot. And overall, Bam is about an average mid-range shooter, and the Bucks allowed him to just stay wide open, and it worked really well as well, even though he's a decent mid-range shooter. The general consensus in the league today is that if you live with mid-range shots, you're going to succeed as a defense. We saw this with the Bucks last season. We saw it with the Toronto Raptors last season. Overall, the mid-range shot is not a good shot to take. Bam knows that, and he wasn't taking a lot in this series because of that, even though he was wide open. And because he was wide open, it allowed the Heat to guard him a little bit easier. Same thing with Jimmy Butler, as I mentioned. He was wide open from 3, and they just didn't even worry about that. 2 less things to worry about here for the Bucks on defense: Bam's mid-range and Jimmy's 3. They just completely ignored that, and because of this, it allowed them to play a little bit easier defensively. Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo were definitely exposed in this series with their inability to shoot. The next thing I'm going to be discussing is how the Heat's zone defense in this series did not work, and it's because the Bucks were a way better shooting team this season. Now, last year, a big success factor for the Miami Heat was their zone defense, how they could go to it in lots of situations where they were in trouble, and it worked specifically against the Bucks because they were not a good shooting team last year, especially in the playoffs. They could leave guys wide open, and we know zone is a really effective defense at times, especially against an offense led by Giannis. Overall, it worked really well for the Heat last season, but the only flaw to their zone defense is how it gives up threes. The threes aren't necessarily wide open, but they're still open enough for a good shooter to definitely knock it down. And this worked against the Bucks so well last season because of how the Bucks were a horrible three-point shooting team. Last season, in the regular season, they ranked 17th in the NBA in three-point percentage with a 35.5%, and in the playoffs, it was the dead last in the NBA with a 26.5% shooting from 3. And most of these threes were pretty open too. Like I mentioned, the Heat's zone defense allowed them to shoot pretty open threes, and even in the first round against Orlando really liked to live with the Bucks shooting the 3, but they were such a horrible shooting team in the playoffs last year, and it really cost them a chance to win the NBA championship. But this season, it's so much better with shooting. Guys like Pat Connaughton and Brook Lopez stepped up and hit a lot more threes this season, and they also added guys like Drew Holiday, Bryn Forbes, Bobby Portis, and PJ Tucker, who are all lethal shooters from 3 and added a lot of valuable floor spacing for this team as well. In the regular season, they ranked 6th in the NBA in three-point percentage with a 38.5% percentage from 3, so they upped their three-point percentage by 3 full percent this season, and in the playoffs this season, they are shooting 35% from 3 now, which again, still isn't great, but it's a big improvement from the last year when they shot 26% from 3 in the playoffs. The Heat zone defense just doesn't work anymore against the Bucks because they have to respect the 3, and I look at a guy specifically like Bryn Forbes, who has shot 49% in the series against the Heat, and even just a guy like this, adding him to the team brings so much more value to this Bucks team. They were in desperate need of shooters. They added 4 very good shooters. Even a guy like Bobby Portis almost led the league in three-point percentage this season, shooting 47% from 3. Most of them are wide open, but still, guys like him and Forbes and Drew Holiday and even PJ Tucker is lethal from the corner. All of these guys bring very consistent shooting to this team, and because of this, the Heat can't comfortably run that zone defense anymore, and that was a big factor in this series as well. The last 2 things I'm going to be discussing are also going to be things that the Bucks just did well, and because of this, the Heat struggled a little bit more. Now, we all know that the Bucks added Drew Holiday this offseason, and saying this was a huge addition to their team is a massive understatement. I mean, his impact in this series was just incredible on both ends. I mean, on the offensive end of the floor, again, like I mentioned, he really played his role as a really valuable floor spacer. That was really crucial because it created a lot more space for Giannis, and also the other shooters on this team did that. But most importantly for Drew Holiday, he averaged 15 points, 7 rebounds, and 10 assists in this series, really played as the main point guard and offense controller for this team, and was an amazing playmaker this series. Like I mentioned, averaged 10 assists, shot 48% from the field, field overall and just added so much value for this team on the offensive end of the floor. Defensively, we know that Drew's an all-defensive caliber player. If you guys watched my recent video about my all-NBA teams and my all-defensive teams and all-rookie teams for the season, you know that I had Drew Holiday on my all-defensive first team, and he played exactly like an all-defensive first-team caliber player in this series. He guarded Goran Dragic for most of the time that he was on the court, ended up guarding him for 20 minutes throughout the series in total, and we know last year Dragic was a huge factor for this team, and I thought he was going to be this year as well. He looked pretty good in game 1, like playoff Dragic, hitting tons of threes off of pull-up threes and pick and rolls, and being a good playmaker as well, but for the most part, Drew really shut him down this series, and he also played a big part in guarding Jimmy Butler one-on-one. That was mostly Giannis's job, but Drew guarded Jimmy Butler for 10 minutes in the entire series, and also did a really good job against him. He forced him to be passive, guarded him really tightly, except for 3 where he allowed him to shoot. Jimmy took 2 threes against Drew Holiday's, missed them both because Drew knew the plan of leaving Jimmy wide open, and overall for the series, Jimmy only shot 40% against Drew Holiday. Overall, Drew's impact on both ends of the floor was huge for the Bucks. It was crucial for their success, like I mentioned, on both ends of the floor, and they wouldn't have won the series so easily without Drew. The last thing I'm going to be discussing is how the Bucks made some adjustments. Yes, I'm going to be giving credit to someone who I thought was one of the worst coaches in the league in Mike Budenholzer, but this season he made a few crucial adjustments that really helped the Bucks here. The first one that I talked about earlier was putting Giannis on Jimmy Butler. Last year, in the playoff series against the Heat, Giannis guarded Jimmy Butler for a total of 3 minutes throughout the entire series. This season, they tried something different by putting Giannis on Jimmy. I know it doesn't seem good because of the height difference, but Giannis is the defensive player of the year, the reigning defensive player of the year from last season, and this worked to perfection. Jimmy was shut down for the most part, as I mentioned. They did leave him open from 3, but when he came in, tried to shoot his mid-range and around the rim, Giannis was there, especially to protect the rim, and did a great job against Jimmy, guarded him for 20 minutes throughout the entire series compared to last year's 3, and I give Mike Budenholzer credit for making this adjustment. Another one is how throughout most of the season last year and this year, a strategy for the Bucks when Brook Lopez is guarding the pick and roll is to put him in drop. But against a guy like Duncan Robinson for the Heat, this really doesn't work well. Last year, Duncan Robinson cooked the Bucks because he had a lot of wide open threes in the pick and roll, and this year, in game 1, the Bucks did use this drop strategy, and it didn't really work well. But in game 2, when they put Duncan Robinson and Bam Adebayo into some screen and roll action, they tried to have Brook Lopez not go into drop, and this worked a little bit, but not even that much. But their main adjustment here is putting PJ Tucker into the game more. PJ Tucker is a more versatile defender than Brook Lopez, can defend the pick and roll a lot better, and obviously was not in drop, played a lot more at the perimeter, and against guys like Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, and Goran Dragic for that matter, he did a really good job of not allowing them to get wide open threes. So overall, Budenholzer made a lot of good adjustments, and the one that I talked about earlier as well of leaving Jimmy and Bam open in 3 and for Bam in the mid-range, that was a great adjustment as well. They came in with a really good plan this series on the defensive end of the floor, and it worked really well. Before I end off this video, I just wanted to say that I was wrong. I was wrong about the Miami Heat, but I do have a new bold prediction for you guys. The Bucks look so good right now that I think they are going to beat the Brooklyn Nets in the second round. I think we can all agree that the Nets are going to end up beating the Celtics in round 1 because of how the Celtics don't have Jaylen Brown right now and Tatum has to carry them. But when the Nets do move on and they face the Bucks, I'm going to go with the Bucks in 6 in this series. They're so much better defensively. I think, again, they're going to come in with a plan, and I ultimately think they're going to pull off the upset and beat the Brooklyn Nets. The Bucks are probably now my favorite to go to the NBA Finals this season. They're playing amazing, and I think they're going to beat the Nets next round and probably make the finals. So there you have it. That is the end of today's video. I was obviously wrong about the Miami Heat, and they played horribly this season, and a few reasons were the ones that I discussed today, and the Bucks played amazing. They came in with a plan, and like I mentioned, I think they're going to make the finals now. Thank you all for watching this video. Be sure to comment down below your thoughts on this series and what you think of the Bucks, and if you think they're going to make the finals. Comment down below what you think of the Heat and why they were so bad this season. As I mentioned, make sure to subscribe if you're new and follow me on Instagram at danieldelari.yt, and I'll see you all next video.